May 28, 1992, former NFL player Robert Rozier stands before Judge Norman Roettget in a Miami federal court as the star witness in one of the most controversial cases in Florida's history. For years, there has been a series of gruesome murders that have gone unsolved in Miami. All of the victims were missing a body part, mostly their ears or fingers, a clear pointer to the fact that these crimes were committed by the same person or group of persons. But finally, the police think they have gotten their suspects, and chief amongst them is the leader of a religious sect known mostly for its goodwill and acts of charity. His name, Yahweh ben Yahweh, the leader of the Yahweh Nation. But why would the leader of a religious sect who had earlier that year sent out thousands of dollars to the victims of a firebombing attack be on trial for conspiracy to commit murder and for being the brains behind the firebombing? Things don't seem to add up. However, it turns out there's an even darker twist to this story. Robert Rosier was a devout member of Yahweh Nation, but today he stands as a witness, ready to betray a religious group he once called his family. Could Rosier be testifying because he was part of the killers, or could the police once again be on a wild goose chase to catch a mystery killer that has haunted the city of Miami for years? This is the twisted case of Robert Rosier. Born on July 28, 1955 in Anchorage, Alaska Territory, Robert Ernest Rosier Jr., as he was initially called, was a United States Air Force kid who grew up in California. Robert Rosier didn't have the all-time happy family experience, and this affected him. But he wasn't entirely a bad egg. Instead, Robert Rosier very quickly registered himself in the minds of those around him as a promising, talented athlete. At Cordova High School, Robert Rosier excelled at American football and was famous for being one of the top players in the region. He was also an excellent track and field athlete, with a very impressive high jump and sprint time. However, he didn't do too well in class and couldn't graduate from high school, so he wasn't able to play college football right away. However, Robert eventually enrolled at Grays Harbor College, where he got noticed by the University of California, Berkeley's football coach, who recruited Robert and had him join the team as a walk-on player. Robert's talent would stand him out again, as he had a lot of success on the football field, and in no time became one of the team's star players. Robert Rosier proved that speed and talent could come hand in hand. But sadly, just like most young stars his age, he couldn't resist the lure to do drugs, and soon enough, he was involved in petty crimes. This didn't do him much good, as his indulgence in drugs began to take a toll on his performance on the field. Eventually, he was kicked off the team. However, for Robert, getting kicked out of the team wasn't going to be the end of his sporting career. His eyes were now set on something even bigger: the NFL. Robert picked himself up and made it to the National Football League. A rare talent like Robert's was hard to overlook, so it was no shocker when he joined the NFL. He was drafted by the St. Louis Cardinals in 1979, but he only played 6 games for the team before he was cut. Unfortunately, Robert Rosier's career was rather short-lived. He later tried out for a few other teams, including the Hamilton Tiger Cats and the Saskatchewan Roughriders in the Canadian Football League. These trials turned out to be efforts in futility, but looking at his performance records, it seemed these teams all consciously refused to accept him, or they didn't just like his face, but whatever their reasons were, it just wasn't his performances. Robert was talented for sure. His persistence, however, proved to be worth it when he finally signed with the Oakland Raiders. But just like the previous teams, his time with the Raiders was also short-lived. Turns out he had developed the habit of getting into a lot of off-field issues, including drug use and petty crimes. This truncated his very promising football career, and Robert Rosier never lived up to his full potential as a football player. With the failure of his NFL career, feeling rejected and unworthy, it wasn't long before Robert Rosier turned to drugs and other criminal activities. Robert Rosier was accused of committing a number of crimes, including armed robbery, kidnapping, and assault. In one incident, he and several accomplices allegedly robbed a jewelry store in Tampa, Florida, and during the robbery, they assaulted the employees with weapons, threatening to hurt anyone who refused to comply with their instructions. Robert also robbed a jewelry store at gunpoint in Miami, Florida. He stole over $50,000 worth of jewelry, which he then attempted to sell through a third party. However, the authorities were able to track down the stolen jewelry through a series of investigations, including forensic analysis of fingerprints and other evidence left at the scene of the crime. In addition to the armed robbery, Robert Rosier was also convicted of car theft. According to the court documents, he and some of his accomplices stole a car and attempted to sell it. Similar to the stolen jewelry, the stolen car was tracked down after a series of investigations. Forensic analysis of fingerprints and other evidence, as well as information from informants, were used to track down the vehicle. Robert's criminal record was piling. Robert didn't stop there, as in another incident, he He allegedly kidnapped and assaulted a man in his home before stealing his property. Robert Rosier continued in crime, becoming so notorious a criminal that the Canadian government issued a warrant accusing him of defrauding businesses and individuals in Montreal and Edmonton by writing checks for goods and services that he knew were worthless. On getting wind of the warrant, Robert Rosier fled to Miami in search of peace, purpose, respect, and a place to lay low. But was this going to be the right decision, or was it a walk into hell itself? Robert Rosier's return to Miami was greeted by a spike in cases of murder and homicide, way more than what was common in the city. The temperature was boiling, and no one knew who was responsible for the heat. In April 1986, a man named Leonard Dupre was followed out of a Coconut Grove bar where he had been drinking. The next morning, it was found that he had been stabbed multiple times with a rather extraordinary murder tool, a 12-inch Japanese knife. This incident, which at the time appeared to be an isolated case, was even more confusing as the lifeless body of James Harris, Dupre's roommate, was found close to him. Miami was stunned, but little did the city's residents know that this was only the beginning. A new killer was on the loose, and it was only a matter of time before he struck again, each time in a defined, satisfactory pattern. On September 5th, a dead body was found by the side of his car parked in the parking lot of a bar. The victim was 61 years old Raymond Kelly, who was suspected to have been robbed of his gun before he was killed. But the most intriguing thing about this incident wasn't the murder or the stolen weapon, it was the state of his body when he was found. Examination revealed that Kelly's death was as a result of multiple knife injuries. Also, both of Kelly's ears were missing, chopped off by the killer. According to the investigation, his right ear was cut off hours after the left one was also severed. It was deduced that the killer finished his job, left the scene, but later came back for the other ear. He either lost it on his way, or he remembered that he needed both ears. Initially, these incidents involved only white victims, so it was thought that a racist murderer was on the loose. But this idea didn't last for long, as 15 days after the ear incident, the killer struck again, and this time it was a black man. A 45-year-old called Cecil Branch was found dead. Examinations revealed that Cecil Branch was stabbed a total of 25 times, with one of his ears cut off. During investigations, a fingerprint was found on the door, raising hopes that authorities were close to uncovering the mysterious killer. But ultimately, the prints didn't match with anyone. Soon enough, another murder victim was discovered, with a pattern to that of the serial killer. A Vietnam veterinarian was killed in the motel he was in, with his ear cut off and physical signs of stab wounds on his body. Another body was also found in the park close to the motel, with his ear cut off too. Who the killer was and his possible motives were the questions the police and the entire city had no answer to. Throughout the 1980s, a religious sect called the Nation of Yahweh gained prominence in parts of the U.S., especially in Miami, Florida. The sect was founded in 1979 by Hulon Mitchell Jr., who went by the name Yahweh ben Yahweh, meaning God, Son of God. It started in black communities of Miami, with Yahweh ben Yahweh drawing supporters through fiery speeches on black history. His followers embraced the teachings of Yahweh ben Yahweh, that African Americans were the original Israelites, and that God and all the biblical prophets were black. He also taught that he had been chosen by the black God to teach blacks the true knowledge of their history, and to lead them back to the Promised Land. Members were forced to quit their jobs, separate from their families, and move into the temple. They also had to give up their names, which they referred to as slave names, and adopt Hebrew names in hopes of experiencing black salvation. Known for their head-to-toe white garb, followers used their collective money to build a multi-million-dollar empire of businesses, and helped rejuvenate housing in some of Miami's remote neighborhoods. Yahweh ben Yahweh's influence grew, largely due to his business and charity efforts, which earned him respect in Miami. He presided over a multi-million-dollar religious empire which he called the Temple of Love. It included the temple, schools, grocery stores, and apartment houses in several U.S. cities. Yahweh was regarded as a black role model and was credited with driving drug dealers from some inner-city neighborhoods. He was also a member of the Chamber of Commerce, regarded as a respectable member of the society for his enterprising spirit, promoting family values and his anti-drug message. The mayor of Miami at the time declared the Yahweh ben Yahweh Day on October 7, 1990. But underneath his charitable acts and respectable figure lay a dark and deadly secret of violence. While most football players explore other passions like becoming a coach or starting up a business after leaving the NFL, Robert Rosier took a different direction. Rosier, who had been a religious person all his life, joined the Nation of Yahweh after meeting Yahweh ben Yahweh in 1982. After serving a 6-month prison sentence for petty crimes, Rosier became a devoted member of the sect, donating all his worldly possessions and taking the Hebrew name Neria Israel, meaning child of God. But donating all your possessions, denouncing your name, separating from your family and moving into the temple doesn't gain you a place in Yahweh's Brotherhood, a secret group of tall, muscular men who were available for special duties. You had to prove yourself to Yahweh ben Yahweh by going through an initiation process. On October 30th, 1986, Robert Rozier Jr. was arrested following the deaths of two men, 28-year-old Anthony Brown and 37-year-old Rudolph Broussard, who were shot at an apartment complex in Opelika, Florida. The apartment had only recently been purchased and taken over by the Nation of Yahweh and its founder, Yahweh ben Yahweh. During investigations, police located the two firearms suspected to have been used in the shooting, and discovered one was the weapon stolen from a recent murder victim, Raymond Kelly, whose ears had been dismembered from his body. Rosier's fingerprints were found on the gun, which was also a match to those on another victim's car. This singular arrest will lead to some scary revelations. While the rest of the world saw Yahweh ben Yahweh as an upright member of society, one that was deserving of the honor of naming a day after him, they had no idea that he was probably one of the most dangerous criminals in Miami, Florida. Yahweh ben Yahweh's teachings were darker and far beyond the religious racism he was known to encourage. He controlled all aspects of the lives of his followers, from clothing, food, medical care, and sex lives. He also became intimately involved with many female followers. While he forced his members to give up their possessions, he lived in wealth, demanding total loyalty by teaching against members who disagreed with or failed to follow his spiritual teachings. He often made disobedient members to stand at meetings and openly face his ridicule. Members of the sect were directed to administer severe beatings to anyone who violated his rules. All members were required to work long hours for the temple's financial interest, even as followers feared for their lives if they violated an instruction, rebelled against Yahweh, or left the temple. Although Yahweh ben Yahweh preached brotherly love, he directed members to commit murder. He also required that his followers publicly state that they would die and kill for God Yahweh, two requirements that he routinely emphasized on in teaching sessions, while his followers literally shouted in unison their willingness to do so. He not only taught that the blacks were true Jews, he taught them that they were living in the land of the white devils. In essence, he was teaching his congregation to hate white people, who he often referred to as the incarnation of evil, demanding retribution for historical injustices and even mere insults. Retribution was often in the form of murder. Yahweh ben Yahweh even encouraged random acts of violence against white people and black followers who had become disrespectful to him, while still maintaining the pretense of being an upstanding citizen. His teachings became black supremacist and violently racist, as he prophesied war between the black and white races, calling white America a country cursed by God Yahweh and harboring God's enemies. Yahweh prophesied that one day his group would chase the white devils from the face of the earth by killing them. He referred to God Yahweh as a terrible black god of war and violence, and predicted that death to his enemies would be at the hand of his death angels. Upon his arrest, Rosier told police that he was 404 years old and couldn't remember his life before conversion. Yahweh Nation supported Rosier with a lawyer, Ellis Rubin, and a public relations campaign for 7 months. But when Rosier issued an ultimatum to the church for a different lawyer, he was excommunicated. During custody, Rosier confessed to being a part of the Death Angel, Yahweh ben Yahweh's secret brotherhood, whose responsibility was to keep the flock in line, and for other special missions as designated by ben Yahweh himself. Special missions like murdering offenders. To become a member of the Death Angels, one had to perform a sacred ritual that involved bringing Yahweh ben Yahweh the ears of the white devils. Rosier admitted to being involved in the killing of 7 white people in order to please Yahweh, with his duties varying from driving the bus to executing the murders himself. He revealed to the 15-member jury that on one occasion he and another sect member were sent to kill a white person. According to the instructions from Yahweh, any white devil would do. During interrogation, Rosier recalled walking the streets for hours and bypassing several possible candidates until they came upon a man passed out in a car in the parking lot of a bar. He and another member of the Sissy Carl Perry pulled out their 12-inch Japanese-style knives that all Death Angels carried and repeatedly stabbed the unconscious man in the chest. They then proceeded to cut off one ear, but they dropped it in the dark and lost it. Still insistent on getting their souvenir, they went back to cut off the other ear. In hindsight, the victim was Raymond Kelly. Yahweh often insisted that his Death Angels bring back ears, fingers, or the heads of victims as proof of their deeds. Rosier also revealed that the items made Yahweh ecstatic, and he would often exempt them from the next day's usual temple chores. On one occasion, he allowed them to go watch movies as a form of celebration after a killing. According to Rosier's revelations, as Yahweh ben Yahweh's powers grew, so did his abuse. He often sent out his followers to forcibly and illegally kick out current tenants from apartment buildings to make room for Nation of Yahweh members. An example was a drug-infested 5-building apartment complex in Opelika that Yahweh Nation acquired on October 27, 1986. Under the guise of trying to improve the residents, members of the sect spent the whole week attempting to evict residents, eventually shooting Anthony Brown and Rudolph Broussard to death, the incident that led to Robert Rozier's arrest. After his excommunication, Rozier agreed to a deal with the police for a reduced sentence. He turned state's evidence in exchange for a 22-year sentence, choosing to partner with the police in their investigation of Yahweh ben Yahweh. Prosecutors were more interested in nailing Yahweh ben Yahweh, so they made Robert Rozier a star witness in the prosecution of the Yahweh Nation's leader. In court, when questioned by U.S. Attorney Trudy Nowicki, Rozier admitted to 7 murders, pleading guilty to the 4 he was accused of, while the police previously had no knowledge of the other 3. According to him, 6 of the killings were carried out on the orders of Yahweh ben Yahweh, while the last was a panhandler who upset him by continuing to ask for money and cigarettes. "I ended up killing him and throwing him in the water," Rozier said. However, Yahweh and his followers insisted he acted alone. After Rozier's arrest, in the heat of the controversy, Yahweh openly dissociated himself from Rozier. He told reporters in a television appearance that he did not approve of murder. "I'm against murder, and I'm against the wantful taking of life by anyone," he said before describing Rozier as a serial killer who led a small group of rogue murderers who acted on their own. By 1990, the Metro-Dade Police Department, MDPD, had built a 14-murder conspiracy indictment, including the attempted beheading of a former disciple and the firebombing of a black neighborhood in Delray Beach, against Yahweh ben Yahweh and 16 members of the Yahweh Nation. On November 7, 1990, in a series of coordinated raids called Operation Jericho, the FBI raided the Yahweh Nation's headquarters and a hotel in New Orleans, where a group of traveling members were staying. Yahweh ben Yahweh was among those arrested. Unable to directly link the murders and most of the indictments to Yahweh ben Yahweh, the case relied heavily upon Rozier's confessions. Defense attorneys attacked Rozier, calling him a liar. Ben Yahweh's wife, Linda Gaines, accused Rozier of singing a song in order to avoid the life sentence or death sentence. Another defense attorney tore into Rozier, claiming he was the biggest liar who was willing to lie against his own mother, talk less of Yahweh, his friends and associates. After a long and rather complicated trial, Yahweh ben Yahweh was found guilty of plotting 14 murders, 2 attempted murders, and a terrorist bombing, and was sentenced to 18 years in prison with the possibility of parole in 9 years, while 6 other Yahweh Nation members were sentenced to between 15 to 16 years in prison. As a reward for his participation in the trial of Ben Yahweh, Robert Rozier was sentenced to only 22 years. Rozier was, however, released in 1996 after serving 10 years of his sentence. He was then placed in the Witness Protection Program under a new name, Robert Ramesses. Remorseful for his previous deeds, he sought spiritualism and intellectual transformation, but on February 5, 1999, he was once again arrested, this time for a bounced check of $66. On discovering Rozier's true identity, police discovered a trail of bad checks that totaled more than $2,000 and charged him with a felony under California's 3 strikes law. At the conclusion of his trial in Placerville, California, Rozier was sentenced to prison for 25 years to life. On January 12, 2001, Rozier was denied parole under his witness protection alias on February 16, 2022, and is not eligible for another hearing until 2027. Robert Rosier remains incarcerated at Mule Creek State Prison today. In the end, Robert Rozier's life is the tragic story of a boy filled with potential, but lacking in the discipline and self-control required to maximize his potential. It is proof of how bad decisions can lead to a spiral of destruction. Robert never fully recovered from his tough childhood, even as he struggled to handle the series of career rejections that left him susceptible to being easily misled. Yahweh ben Yahweh identified this vulnerable young man with a passion for crime and set Robert on the path to becoming a cold killer. His involvement in the sect and the crimes he committed on their behalf left him facing a lifetime of consequences. This story serves as a reminder that we all have choices to make in life, and that our choices can have far-reaching effects on our future. Even the most promising people can lose their way when they choose to follow the wrong path. Let's hope that others can learn from Robert Rozier's mistakes and make better choices for themselves. Thanks for sticking with us all through this video. Hope you learned something. Keep the conversation going by letting us know what you think in the comments section. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos just like this. See you in our next video.